The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Hi, I'm Leon Charney, and welcome to another Leon Charney Report. We are talking to you from Jerusalem, Israel, and guess with whom? David Hartman, our favorite subject. You know that we have done Hartman 1, Hartman 2. These are called the Hartman tapes. Never in the history of this show, and that's over a 9-year history, have we done 3 full hours of tapes with anybody, and that includes a lot of prime ministers, a lot of presidents, etc., etc. It seems that everyone in our audience wants to see or hear David Hartman, so we came back and we're going to do a 3rd Hartman tape. And it's always a privilege to be with him in Israel, and he's got a beautiful, call it a citadel, which is anti-religious, but in a sense religious. And he is one of the most important philosophical personalities maybe in the world of Judaism, and certainly in the state of Israel. David, welcome again to the show.
Shalom, Leon. Thank you.
One thing I can bet, you've been watching the playoffs, the basketball playoffs.
Absolutely. It just reminds me of how far the world has changed since I played basketball and what is basketball today. I mean, there's no similarity. The people who play basketball today defy the law of gravity. You know, when I played, I was still, you know, moving with 2-hand shots and just, I mean, I can't just keep up with the speed.
We got to explain to our audience for the first time, our last tape, the Hartman tape 2, David was a great ball player, and in fact, he opposed Bob Cousy.
I was with him. I didn't oppose him. We played together.
You played together with him, and you outscored him.
That's right.
And what did Cousy say? He's going to convert to Judaism after that?
No, not exactly. He read it in Time magazine and just sent me a letter. I was shocked. I see a letter, then I see the signature from who it's from, Bob Cousy. And I just trembled as I opened up the letter, you know. And he says, David, he was very proud to hear of my role in Israel, etc., etc. And he says, by the way, I had a bad night that night. He doesn't want to sound like a jock, you know what I mean? But that's, so from then on, I put away my smicha, my ordination certificate, my PhD things, and I just walk around with Cousy's letter. Endorsement from Cousy. My grandchildren and children now look upon me with a different respect.
You know, you're kibitzing around, I'm sure you did it, but
I'm serious.
The prominence of sports in a human being's life is so strong. Why is that, David?
I think it reflects a certain type of spontaneous joy. It sort of gives expression to the aggressiveness of human beings, to the competitive instinct in human being, and yet no one suffers from it. So it's a very good sublimation for many of our energies, and it's an art form. I mean, today basketball is an art form. I mean, you see the way in which people can cooperate with each other. It's not a one-on-one game. It's where a team melds in cooperation with each other, and the type of moves and the type of, you know, each one helps the other one as they block the other guy in the drives and etc. And you see the quickness, the speed. This is a beautiful thing to see.
All right, but that's basketball. But there are people who love boxing. There are people who love matadors. They bullfights.
Yeah, but that stuff
that's aggression. That's aggression.
That's pure aggression. That's a sublimation for aggression. You know, they want to see blood. You know, there is that. But I never enjoyed those type of.
Would that be considered anti-Jewish?
I don't know about anti-Jewish. Jews, you know, the whole notion of anti-Jewish is strange to me. In some way, what is Jewish is one of the most serious questions that people ask today. Right. Who is a Jew?
Right.
Like, what does it mean to have a Jewish society? What are the characteristics of our people? Now, it depends where you come from. Now, in Israel, the heroic impulse, the army person, the person who doesn't run, the person who has initiative in war, etc., was a new hero. For other times, George Steiner, I was on a program with him last night, hails the image of the Jew.
George who?
George Steiner.
Steiner.
Is not cruel, the lack of cruelty, the idea that we never exploited and really tried to satisfy our instinct for being males through power over others. The idea of self-control, of decency, of gentleness, is one image of the Jew, which is also true. Another image of the Jew is a person who is always skeptical about what normally people think is absolutely true. The Jew is always a person, maybe verkehrt, efshe kann man sagen verkehrt, as they say in Yiddish, maybe you can say it the other way, and always a sense that, you know, skeptical but yet concerned about truth, searching but yet never gullible that quickly. It's another, the art of argumentation, of seeing complexities. That's a Talmudic spirit of sort of doing justice to different points of view.
But can't non-Jews do the same thing?
Sure they can. But see, I never give these characteristics as uniquely Jewish.
Right.
To me, a Jew is a member of a family with a history and a tradition. Now, there's certain features in the Jewish experience which all human beings share. In other words, I'm never for Jewish uniqueness. I don't believe in that.
A lot of people testify or give testimony that more Nobel Prizes have been won by Jews than any other
So what of it? I mean, that doesn't...
That's not meaningful to you?
No, it really isn't.
Interesting, because a lot of...
I know, that's some sort of chauvinistic pride.
Right.
You know, I'm not, you know, look what Jews do on the basketball court, and they look like schlemiels there. I mean, so what am I going to say? I mean, so they do well in physics, but then they don't do well in other things. Now, the great tenors in the Metropolitan Opera are not Jewish.
Right.
There was once Richard Tucker, Jan Pierce.
Correct.
But okay, that's all we can count, that's all. So what am I going to say? I mean, excellence is not a unique Jewish property. All cultures produce people of excellence, people who are moral, people who are sensitive, people who are critical. As a nation, we've experienced many things. And if we're sensitive to our history, we learn the pain of being the stranger. We learn what happens when people can't handle people who are different. So our history bears witness to the terror that tyranny has of Jews because they are a different people. They don't bow down to the Hamans of history.
Right.
They don't bow down to the Stalins of history. Now, as a result of that, the Stalins of history and the Hamans of history can't succeed in their plan for triumph in the world, means the yearning for absolute power, as long as Jews are around. Jews remind you
so they're
that
a blocker. They're like a blocker.
They're blocker. Jews bear witness to the fact that man is not God, and the state is not God. I can never tell you who God is. If you learn Maimonides, you could only say what God is not. So the idea, you have to define what is idolatry. I'm not interested so much in defining God, but what is false worship? What are the idols of history that you have to break? We are the iconoclasts. We don't bow down to strange gods. And this is, if you ask me, the unique destiny of the Jewish people. Now, our history taught us about that. So therefore, we're meant to bear witness to the importance of the love for the stranger. As I once mentioned to you, the most important commandment in the Bible is not love your neighbor. Because love your neighbor is easy, because he's like you, he's your neighbor. He has garden, he goes to the same movies, he goes to the same golf club. To love your neighbor is much easier.
So it's love the stranger.
Love the stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. In other words, what's the first story you tell a Jewish child? Leon, you remember when you grew up? The first story, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. In the Passover Seder, you teach a Jew what it means to be a Jew by telling him that you were slaves. We were born in Egypt. We were born as a people who were subject to the pains and afflictions of a culture that could not stand and tolerate difference. As a result of that, our history from our flesh is one that we have to be super empathic and careful to those who are the minority group.
All right, so a question, David. Must you have prayer to do this?
No.
Must you have ritual to do this?
No, let me say this to you. I do believe that ethics could be separated from ritual.
Right.
I'm not going to claim that if you don't go to synagogue on Shabbat, you're not going to be an ethical human being.
Right.
I think you should go to synagogue on Shabbat because there's something about Shabbat,
family,
which is beyond, is family, and is also looking upon life in another way. Not measuring yourself only by your exploitive power, not measuring yourself by how much money you make, not measuring yourself by technology. and in some way discovering spiritual peace, discovering
So why couldn't I do that going into a room and meditating for 2 hours every week? Why does it have to be on the 7th day, and why do I have to go to a synagogue?
It's not on the 7th. You don't have to go to the 7th day or the synagogue. You see, again, I'm asking you what the function of a Sabbath should be. Sabbath celebrates the world as a creation.
Is it a religious experience?
Absolutely.
Okay.
If it's not a religious experience, it loses its meaning. It's not a social principle for psychological well-being. If you want therapy, you go to a psychiatrist. I don't go to synagogue to hear sermons that'll give me therapy.
Right.
I don't go to synagogue for peace of mind.
Right.
Because many times you go to a synagogue and you're disturbed. You know, you're disturbed either by the poorness of the sermon or by the loudness of the noise.
Or the fact that a lot of people don't give reference.
Yeah, my point in the matter is that you go to synagogue because A, you want to be with the family, you want to be with a community. The synagogue is a place that
community.
Develops community in a shared values of the community. It's a place that educates the community to what you should aspire for.
But you could also have negative values there.
Yeah, you could have negative values wherever a community meets.
That's right. And there are many experiences that people have that are negative.
Similar in Israel.
Any place.
Israel is the big synagogue of the Jewish people. It's the framework that gives a sense of home, a feeling that we are a people. Now, there are wonderful things that go on here. There's negative things that go on here. No family only is talat shekulat chelet. It's not just purity.
Pure.
If you think that, you know, being a member of the Jewish people is a guardian against all corruptions and a passport to moral purity, you're making a big mistake. I'm a Jew because I was born into a family, I was educated to this family, and I love this family. But I do not claim that if you're not a member of this family, you're not going to be ethical, or if you're not a member of this family, you're not going to get a Nobel Peace Prize.
So could you be a good Jew and not have ritual?
You can be a good person without being a good Jew. Okay? I'd rather say it that way.
Talmudic answer.
That's a Talmudic answer. You can be an ethical human being without in any way being a Jew. You can be a moral human being, you can be intelligent, you can be wise, without necessarily joining the Jewish family. But that's not the point. The point is that I'm a member of the Jewish family. That's the given. I don't choose my family. It's a given. I define my life by their story. If I ask myself, who am I? I'm a member of a family that was Shalom Hartman and Bessie Hartman, who brought me up in Brownsville, and they told me stories. They told me the story of their life in terms of who their parents were and who their grandparents were. And there's a larger narrative. In other words, people come to know themselves from the stories that they tell. What's the narrative that I decided to define my identity by? The narrative, for me, is the Bible.
Well, you know, traditionally, people kept records with the family Bible. It was passed on. In the law, we learn about it all the time. The family Bible was the tradition.
Yeah, the family read the Bible together. In other words, the family narrative.
And it went generation to generation.
Generation, right. Now the question is, what's our narrative? That's the big issue facing Jews today. When they lose history, when they lose memory, they lose their narrative. And that's the meaning of Israel. Israel has restored the historical narrative of the Jewish people. It has in some way given a drama where history and 3,000 years of history play out in one's individual identity. You see, you go in the country, you see the pastime is archaeology. They're digging in the ground and saying, look, we're deeper. We've been around for 2,000 years. We've been around for 2,500 years. And the issue for Jewish identity today, and the issue that the Jewish people face today is, to what degree will globalization and modernity swallow up your memory, and you will lose all connection to the narrative? How do you bring your narrative into the modern world?
How do you?
Oh, that's the
question.
That is the question.
That's Hartman Tape 4?
That's Hartman Tape 4, and that's to spend a year at the Shalom Hartman Institute, where we're prepared to organize a seminar of how do you bring tradition into the modern world. See, the Haredim, the right-wing fundamentalists, believe that they have the key to the narrative. And the narrative they're telling is turning off majority of Israelis. Because their narrative says you have to say no to the modern world, you have to say no to feminism, you have to say no to egalitarianism, you have to say no to liberal values. If you want to be in touch with the narrative, that's what you have to do. You have to return to the ghetto mind, which rejects all other values which are not fundamentally come out of the Jewish tradition.
That's true. That's what they expect.
That's what they expect. Now, therefore, the major issue for them is the women's issue, because they see the women as a symbol of modernity. Therefore, if you go to Meisharim, the most concern is obscenity, modesty of dress, and etc., etc. The government is near. The whole issue in the country today is Batsheva dances. I call it the theology of Gatkis, you know, and the whole concern, which the whole country is talking about, is should they have worn long pants or not?
To the audience, there was a Jubilee celebration, 50 years. It was a huge, huge production, Hollywood production, maybe Super Bowl production, and in that production was a segment by the Batsheva dance group. There was a problem there of tenacious, which is modesty.
Right.
And they went to the Supreme Court and they tried to get an injunction. The Supreme Court held against it. Then they agreed to go to the president. The president worked out a compromise. But
They
10 minutes.
they should wear
half gatkis, right? Which is underwear.
Gatkis is long underwear.
Right. Now, it's not a joke because it became a huge problem in Israel, or at least a topic. And then what happened was that 10 minutes before the performance, someone marched on stage and said that they would not perform. This caused a massive split or schism between the secular Jews who said there should be freedom of press, of freedom of culture, and the Haredim Jews, the religious Jews, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, who said it was blasphemy basically on religion because they were doing a Hebrew song, I think, Echad Mi Yodea.
Yeah, right.
And so therefore it was sacrilegious. And everyone talks about it. Now, David Hartman says no one talked about the shofar. They opened up the performance there with the shofar. Now, you say that was a sacrilegious experience.
Absolutely.
Also?
The shofar is a symbol of calling people to God, calling people to repentance, not calling people to a 50th year Jubilee celebration. And they had blowing, and they were wearing white garments,
right,
which was to me vulgar, which is again to me the symbol that many times in Israel you can take sacred symbols and use it for nationalist purposes and therefore vulgarize it. That's a very serious problem. Everything becomes holy when it's used in the mantle of nationalism. See, that's legitimate. Anything that will in some way encourage nationalist pride, you can use anything. Now, if you look at the Jubilee year, here was an opportunity. This is what I want to explain to you when I feel who has the key to the past, who opens the key to the tradition. The issue religiously that they were talking about in the 50th year celebration, which the country is going in a cultural war. Right. Ronnie Milo forms his party.
Mayor of Tel Aviv, who just formed a party.
Just announced that he's going to go for prime minister and form a party.
Based upon this issue.
This issue.
Right.
So in other words, the Gatkis, the long pajamas, created a new third party. So in other words, a revolt against the religious right-wing fundamentalist for cultural freedom. So it's a holy war being fought now. Now, I claim if the country wanted to be Jewish, I would have had a different narrative. I would say the year of the Jubilee is here. What does the Bible say about Jubilee year? It's a time when you proclaim freedom in the land. All slaves are freed. No one is exploited because of poverty. No one is exploited because of miscalculation, which he sold his land because of poverty. So the land, he's returned to his land. You try to create an egalitarian society economically and socially. And you proclaim the Jubilee year on Yom Kippur, ritual. The day of Yom Kippur, which is a day of personal repentance, proclaims a national yearning to create egalitarianism and justice in a society. So wouldn't it have been nice if the rabbin had said, we're coming now to the Jubilee year. What do the economists of this country feel that we can contribute to social justice? What can we contribute to making people feel a sense of dignity and not being manipulated because of poverty? And that would be the discussion in the society. That would be the religious contribution to the Jubilee year. That's what I would want to see. What now is the society? Should you wear long pants? Did their underwear thing show? Does it look too immodest? Did they sing? In other words, what's going on here? You chose an issue that defines the Judaism of the country in the 50th Jubilee year. That's what the country is concerned about. You understand what I'm saying, Leon?
Absolutely. So, but why didn't anybody do this?
Why didn't anybody do it? Because the perception of what are religious issues are defined by the anti-Zionist community, the Haredi community that doesn't care about the Judaic spirit of this country. Because they're not Zionists, they're not interested, they're not committed to the state.
So, but wait a minute, you're saying that the religious parties in the Knesset feel the same way? These people are committed to the state, they take an oath.
The religious parties in the Knesset, depends which ones. There's religious Zionist parties who care about the state and the national renewal, and there's other religious parties who are there because they want to be able to be supported by the state.
They want to get the funding.
They have to get the support, which is understandable.
Ovadia Yosef, head of Shas.
Right.
Does he care about the state, to your knowledge?
I think he cares about it in another way, but it's not in the way that. In other words, I'm
not
interested.
Progressive?
No, let me explain to you. You see, how do you look at the Jubilee year? You can look at the Jubilee year from the formal laws, which says you're not supposed to plant in the 50th year, and you have to return the land. Well, we don't have any more land on the basis of the tribes. So you say the law is not applicable, so therefore I don't have to think about it. My view is that the forms of this law are not applicable. But the spirit is.
Obviously.
So let's get beyond the formal structure and get at the spirit of the law.
Right.
If we don't get at the spirit of the law, we miss the meaning of the law.
If Aravat had converted to Judaism, he could get his land back in the 50th year.
I don't know if it was his initially. You see, I don't think he sold it. But even the question of Arafat, how you treat Arabs, is a serious religious issue.
Absolutely.
How do you treat minorities? How do you treat the Druzes? How do you treat Bedouins? Now that's what the religious community should be concerned about, because you should love the stranger, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And Israel should be a model society of the way it treats minorities. Now if it doesn't, then it's not a Jewish society. In other words, Judaism is not that every restaurant is kosher. It's not that you won't see bread on Pesach. And I think that's important, but that's not the only criteria. We've come back into statehood, into power. We control a whole national culture. Our Judaism should be equivalent to this major revolution. It should be a Judaism that inspires the society as a whole, not just the kitchen. Again, the kitchen. Back to the kitchen. Back to El Al. If I run on El Al, you want real kosher, hot kosher, nachamal kosher. Again, not again the pots and the pans. I mean, Israel is a revolt against the pots and the pans. No? Shouldn't it be?
I got to cut for a break. It's so true. I'm not laughing at what he's saying. I'm laughing at the metaphors, because the tears are coming out. And obviously we know David Hartman very well. We've taped him for 2 hours before. And what he says are pearls of wisdom, which is a progressive way to become a Jewish person and be part of a Jewish nation. And by the way, it's the first time I have this crew with me, about 2 or 3 times. First time, when you finished last time, we got a standing ovation from the crew. Only 3 of them. Am I correct? We'll be back. Don't leave us.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high. To have this courageous man and my close friend killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the backdoor channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening. A book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or Audible.com. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at Audible.com or on iTunes. Discover The Mystery of the Kaddish.
We're back. We're talking with the great philosopher David Hartman. It's part 3 of the Hartman tapes, and as I said before, he's a historical figure on this show because it's the only time we've taped 3 hours with any guest. He's written a book which, you know, it's in paperback. It's called A Living Covenant, and you can find it at any bookstore in the United States. It's just come out again. It's a reprint, and it's done very well on hardcover. I'm sure most of you would like to take a look at it. David, the Jubilee concept is a fascinating one. I have been in Israel during this whole process of the Jubilee. I don't think anybody has said a word to the effect of what you have. Why is it that no one is... people study Yovel. Yovel's Jubilee. They understand what it meant. Nobody's made any commentary on it.
Because we're stuck in the forms. You see, because the Talmud says that the Jubilee, it doesn't apply anymore, so they're not looking to see, can I in some way glean certain aspects of what I don't, it's not literally applied anymore.
Right.
But what is the spirit that could infuse it? We're caught in a formalism, which I think is mistaken. In other words, I think there are many beautiful things in the Bible that have been, neutralized by the law and the Talmud, which is, I appreciate what the Talmud did, but they could still speak to us. I mean, the whole relationship between the prophet and the king, the whole concern with minimizing the vulgarities of power by having special laws to the king, that could give us an opportunity maybe to give directions to people who hold power in this country. In other words, so he's not a king, it's not important. What is the spirit that we have about power? Why is there always been in the Jewish tradition the prophet with the king? Why is it necessary to always have a moral voice independent of politics, in which politics has to answer to? Is there this voice in this country? People have to play that role. In other words, there's certain things, we want to be a Jewish country, and we use external symbols, the menorah, the Hatikvah song, Hebrew. Oh, those are nice things. But they're not depth. They're not things that build character. They're not things that build the soul of a nation. We are looking for our soul, and we need to find ways in which our people could bring us back to the Jewish tradition.
And you think you can do that how? Through a political process? Through a religious process? How are you going to do that?
The only way that I believe in is the educational process. You have to have teachers out there who can inspire the community, who can educate them, because I think you can't build a moral, religious spirit in this country through legislation. The Knesset is not the educator. The Knesset has to be the adjudicator. The Knesset has to make room for all groups. All interpretations of Judaism have to be welcomed in this country. Conservative, Reform, Orthodox, everyone. And the state has to see to it that no one is oppressed and no one is taken away and demonized and not given legitimacy. The state doesn't decide whose interpretation is correct. Bibi is not qualified to say, Hartman, you're a better philosopher or a better interpretation than another rabbi. That's not Bibi's qualifications. He has to be, a good prime minister who has to worry about the peace process. He has to worry about the economy. He has to worry about, as far as the spiritual values of this country, that's not the Knesset.
Is it for the chief rabbi?
The chief rabbi should be an educator. He should be a voice that awakens the people to something larger, but that's not the role.
What is their role?
I don't know, ask them. I'm still trying to figure out. I've lived here 25 years, What their role is, I don't know.
It's a political role?
I don't know. They're in some way, sometimes a loincloth for nationalism.
So it's, in a sense, a very dangerous situation to have a chief rabbi. Do we need a chief rabbi in this country?
No. Nope. I call for the separation of religion from state totally. Religion should not be a political instrument. It should have no power at all. It should be an educative force that grows from the community. We will have a Jewish community not because the state gives laws, but because people want to live a certain way. And the people should want to live a certain way by having people educate them. In this way, I believe that the American models of local synagogues is very important for this country. This country, the rabbi is appointed by the Ministry of Religion. I would want the community to appoint the rabbi. I would want the community to judge the qualifications of the rabbi.
All right, so we're into a very serious topic. So if you separate religion from state, the state of Israel would be what to you?
It would be a state that nurtures and supports the efforts of its people to build an educational philosophy.
And should those people be Jewish or Arabs?
Well, it should support Arabs as well. It should provide opportunities for Arabs to build their culture and their Islamic culture, and it should support Jews. The people who live here, who vote here, who are citizens, should receive support from the government to in some way advance their particular cultural identity.
Is it important that most of the denizens or inhabitants of the state be Jewish?
Well, if it's going to be a Jewish country, that's what is needed. I mean, if it's to mirror.
So, David, all right, we're into something very heavy here. Agassi, the philosopher, by the way, has the same concept, totally, but no one has defined what the state of Israel would be. Is it a Jewish state?
It's a Jewish state only if people live in it Jewishly. The state is not Jewish because it has a term on top there. This is called a Jewish state.
Right.
How do people live in Tel Aviv? How do people live in Jerusalem? How do the people live? How do they build their families? What type of stories do they tell? How do they define their lives? That's what makes it Jewish. Jewish is not an abstract title, because El Al is Jewish, because it's written in Hebrew. No, I want El Al to be Jewish because it has good pilots and it cares for its passengers and it serves decent food and it takes security message seriously. In other words, how do you live, Leon? In other words, we're Jewish not because the Arabs attack us. We're Jewish because of the way we want to implement the values of our tradition. It's the way we reclaim our tradition, the way we apply our tradition to our lives.
So is there any reasoning for every Jew in the world to try to settle in Israel? Is it a higher level of living? Is it a higher level of religion? What is it?
I would say the following. I chose to live in Israel.
Right.
However, I'm a person from the diaspora,
right.
And I feel that diaspora Jews can't live only off Israel. Diaspora Jews have to build educational institutions, synagogues, and community life, which gives them a rich experience as a Jew. However, in Israel, I believe there's something very significant, that we have the control of a total culture, we have the power to care for Jews all over the world, and in some way we're given the opportunity to translate Jewish values into all aspects of life.
Okay.
Now, but Israel is an opportunity, it's not yet a reality. And those who care about that opportunity and want to be challenged by that opportunity should come here.
But under your concept, and correct me if I'm wrong, Israel would be really a trustee for all Jewish people of the world to show them how a Jewish life should be lived.
That's correct. If in my dream, in other words, it would be a compelling image of a Judaism beyond the kitchen. It would be a Judaism that talks about moral values, the concern with power, with justice, with welfare systems. It would be a Judaism that gives a message of what it means to build a family, what's it mean to have power, what's it mean to have a government that creates a feeling of solidarity in its citizens. It gives a vision of the totality of life.
So it would be the guardian or the example of how the Jewish life should really be experienced.
That's correct.
That's the concept of a Jewish state.
That's the concept of a Jew, for me.
And it's very hard to put across here, I assume, because it's interrelated here with...
No, because religion is identified with ghetto.
So you would have no problem with Orthodox or Reform or conservative living here if that's the type of Jewish
If that's
life?
the people they build a Jewish life, I would encourage them completely. I said to someone, gave a major address for the Reform movement when they had their rabbinical convention here. I would do it for the conservative movement. My view is that I would like to make Reform rabbis better. I'd like to make conservative rabbis better, even though I disagree with much of their orientation, because that would make the Orthodox better. Monopolies create ignorance.
Right.
If you're in competition, you have to have a good product. I would want the conservative Reform movements to be powerful, and they would have to make the Orthodox run, and they have to then be better. Competition. Monopolies destroy the spirit.
You're a graduate of Yeshiva University. Your ordination came from the very esteemed Rabbi Soloveitchik. If he heard this theory, do you think that he could accept it?
I don't know. I can't make him responsible for my thoughts.
That's true.
The only thing I could do is say that I think...
But you must have learned this.
I learned this spirit from... I learned from my teacher, first of all, intellectual freedom. I learned from my teacher he was never intimidated by any idea. He never called an idea heretical. He never, he was willing to learn from all the world. And he was honest intellectually, enormously honest intellectually. And in some way, he welcomed conservative and Reform rabbis who came to the classes to learn by him. I never heard him say, "You're conservative."
You did?
Yes, I saw. I've seen them. They used to come to the class in Talmud.
Really?
Sure. He wanted intellectual excellence in the Orthodox community.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he wrote the letters of recommendation for me to study philosophy.
Right.
He wrote the letters for me to go to Fordham University. In other words, he wanted me to merge the worlds of philosophy and Talmud. And I told him, but doesn't that create religious conflicts? He says, you know, it's not safe to ride a plane. That doesn't mean that a plane sometimes crashes. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't ride a plane. So I wanted to tell him when I was in graduate school, Rebbe, my plane crashed. But the point is, he was a person who really represented for me the honesty of a religious searcher. He respected the quest.
He was a hunter.
He was a hunter. And he was a vigorous, intellectual, powerful hunter who was never intimidated by ideas. That's the gift he gave me. Now, he never told me that I should never speak to Christians, which I do, even though he wrote an essay, Confrontation, which he talked against the Orthodox rabbinate having dialogues with the Christians, because he felt that matters of faith, there's no possibility for dialogue. And I told him, Rebbe, I have those dialogues. I talk with Christian theologians, and I think it's very important. He says, did I ever tell you that you shouldn't? I said, but you wrote an article, Confrontation, which you're opposed to it. He says, did I ever tell you that you can't? He never in some way said to me, you can't do that because it's dangerous.
Did you stay in touch with him after you?
Absolutely, always.
All the time?
All the time. I used to visit him. I loved him very deeply. I saw him in the last few weeks of his life, last months of his life. I remember my son, it was a very moving scene. My son went with me to him, and I wanted him to meet my son. And I remember him saying to my son, watch over your father. I know his loneliness.
Very interesting.
I know his loneliness. And what he was concerned about, he said to me, Hartman, since the time I know you've been a God-intoxicated individual seeking to serve God truthfully. The only thing I'm opposed to is playing for the grandstands. When I organized for the first time an ecumenical Jewish thing in Quebec, I used to bring the leading conservative thinkers, leading reform thinkers, and Orthodox thinkers together to spend a week studying Talmud and talking ethics together and learning from each other. Because I felt it was important to build bridges then. And I did it in Quebec. And I said to my teacher, I want you to know what I'm doing. I didn't ask him, is it permitted for me to do? Because he didn't, he wants you to have a sense of independence. And they used to come, it used to be beautiful. Emil Fackenheim, the Reform Movement, Herman Schallman in Chicago, Reform Rabbi, and Moshe Greenberg from the Conservative Movement, Yochanan Muffs. I mean, an amazing group of people. Elie Wiesel was within that group, Yitz Greenberg, Aaron Lichtenstein. It was an amazing cadre of people. Eliezer Berkowitz. It was a great experience. The only thing he said to me is, don't invite the New York Times reporter. In other words, the important thing is, don't grandstand. Don't play for the grandstands. If you're doing it because you feel it's important for Jews to learn from each other and grow from each other and have an honest conversation, no problem. But don't play for the grandstands. That was the only thing he told me. In other words, what he wanted was authenticity.
And I'll give you an interpretation now. I will say, this is my own opinion, that the reason he told your son to watch over you because you're a lonely man is because he was a lonely man.
Absolutely. I mean,
this is my interpretation.
I think your interpretation, Leon, is right on. His major essay that he wrote is The Lonely Man of Faith.
Which means anyone who's quizzical about...
Everyone who's really searching in a certain way. Today, I mean, he knew the arrogance of institutional orthodoxy, which he did not respect. I mean, he hated arrogance. In fact, they tell the story of Ernst Simon, who was a great disciple of Buber. And Akiva Simon met him. Rabbi Soloveitchik asked him, Professor Simon, I hear that you're affiliated in some way with the conservative movement in Israel. And Simon was a very seriously observant halachic Jew. So Simon says the following answer, which is a classic. Rabbi Soloveitchik, the people I can talk with, I can't pray with. And the people I pray with, I can't talk with. Now the point is, and Soloveitchik looked at him and said, I understand.
Terrific.
In other words, the question is...
One issue before we go back to a break, and I don't want to lose it, is under your interpretation, we have this great model of the State of Israel which shows the people of the world how to live in a Jewish environment. Is Zionism a component of that, or it doesn't really...
Well, Zionism was the movement to remind the people that they are a nation.
And that was it.
And that was it. It created the apparatus for a nation to build its own culture. Zionism created the conditions.
It's a trigger.
It's a trigger. It created the foundations for this to happen. It has not yet happened. I don't want to lie. It has not yet happened. The great pain of this country is the gap between what it could be and what it is. In fact, I claim, and this is a radical statement, Leon, in your program I can say it because you're only the few people who are not just sound bites for me.
No, we're not sound bites at all.
Now, I said the great achievement of Zionism is that it showed the failures of orthodoxy. It created a state and said, okay, give me a message. And we have not given a message that has an effect on politics, on political theory. We haven't given a message on social welfare. We haven't given a message on the quality of social justice and economic justice. We always spoke in grand phrases, and here is a country waiting for a Jewish message, and it has not yet given it. So the failure in this country is not the failure of the Zionists, it's the failure of the religious community to provide a leadership that would move the country to move in a spiritual direction.
Terrific statement. We got to cut after that, take a break, and we'll come right back and continue with David Hartman. He's one of the best, and I don't say that in terms of better or worse or good. He's a man who teaches you that you have to think, if you're Jewish, if you're not Jewish, you must be in thought and try to make yourself a better human being. And that's the importation of these talks with the Hartman Institute and David Hartman, the Hartman tapes. We'll be back. I'm going to ask him about the Pope, so don't leave us.
In modern Middle East history, only one peace treaty has stood the test of time, the 1978 Camp David Accord. In the new documentary film, Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace, learn the true story behind the greatest diplomatic achievement of our time and its lessons for the future.
The price of peace is very high to have this courageous man and my close men killed.
Winner of the Telly Award for Best Cultural Program. Now available at select stores including Barnes & Noble and online at Amazon.com. Now get the book the hit movie was based on, Leon Charney's Backdoor Channels. Learn about the Backdoor Channel negotiations that led to the historic 1978 Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. Become a witness to history and order Backdoor Channels online at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Also available at all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at iTunes or Audible.com. Relive history. Order Backdoor Channels. Get best-selling author Leon Charney's latest book, The Battle of the Two Talmuds. Join Charney as he explores years of Jewish history to find out why and how Talmudic scholars and rabbis abandoned the Holy Land for the lands of the diaspora. Learn about the power struggles behind the creation of the Jerusalem and Babylonian Talmuds. It's a book critics call engaging and enlightening. A book which will be of interest to people of every faith. Now available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or download the audiobook of The Battle of the Two Talmuds at iTunes or Audible.com. Leon Charney sets out to discover the true meaning of the Kaddish, the Jewish custom of reciting a prayer to commemorate the death of a close relative. Join Charney as he finds out the history of the Kaddish and how it has evolved. Reviewed as a refreshing walk through Jewish history and a book that deserves to be read by both Jews and non-Jews, The Mystery of the Kaddish is now available online at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all other retailers and booksellers. Or download the audiobook at Audible.com or on iTunes. Discover the mystery of the Kaddish. Available now over iTunes, Amazon, and Google Play. Leon Charney's cantorial CD in Disco Lam. Listen as Charney movingly sings El Moleh Rachamim and Charney's amazing rendition of a disco remix of Adon Olam, all sung in the incredible and individual Charney style. Also listen to the CDs on Rhapsody. Download Leon Charney's cantorial songs in Disco Lam, the disco remix of Adon Olam on Amazon, iTunes, and Google Play. Or listen in on Rhapsody. All available now.
We're back. It's Leon Charney, A Living Covenant by David Hartman, with whom we are speaking today. This giant philosopher in the state of Israel, emigrated, by the way, from Montreal, where he was a pretty comfortable guy, and he was a pulpit rabbi for about 2,000 people, families, I guess, and came here a long time ago to show that he has a commitment to the state of Israel, and he's trying to inform people as to what he thinks the state should look like. Highly important. 5,000 was sold in hardback already, so you got to catch this before it's out of publication. David the Pope. First of all, his relevancy. Does he have any relevancy to us as Jews?
Sure he does. I mean, he's the spiritual head of one of the greatest churches and movements in the world. And he can define the moral strength of Catholicism and the way Catholicism has to in some way speak and act in the modern world. And he is a person of great integrity, intellectual power, very powerful intellectual, who is trying very deeply, I think, to correct the abuses of the church over the years regarding the Jewish people. I think that's sincere. I think in some way he can make a major difference into the future of Judaism and Christianity.
Can you tell me one thing, aside from the Pope, why, let's say the 50th anniversary of Israel, every major media outlet in the world was involved with this thing? I think CNN had this thing live for a while. I think BBC had it live for a while. Could you explain that to me?
I was on Channel 4 of English television last night.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an amazing phenomenon.
What is it?
There is a fascination with this story. See, Christianity and Islam in some way have mediated the biblical tradition to the world. I mean, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is a byword for people. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is a living phrase that has attracted enormous frameworks. Jerusalem. The Jerusalem for the pilgrims was a symbol of hope. American, every liberation movement in South America, liberation theology, works itself out from the Exodus story in the book of Exodus. In other words, so the Jewish story and the Jewish history is part of world culture. And therefore there's a very deep belief in the world that this people were meant to be the carriers of something important. The Lord's people. The Lord's people.
Chosen people?
The Lord's people is another way of saying it. They were in some way not meant to be just plain. They were meant to carry something of major importance.
And therefore, all this involvement by everybody.
They want to know the story. They want to know the story. They want to know who we are. Do we bring hope to politics? I mean, they feel in some way, I mean, there's a certain banality in the world today. There's a certain feeling, can you really do something major? All the great revolutions failed. All the great ideologies failed. Can this little people that came out of torture and death 50 years ago, can they rebuild themselves into a light unto the nations?
All right. Is Israel a miracle or is it hard work? Asa Weitzman, the president of Israel, said in his Jubilee address that he doesn't believe in miracles. He believes it's hard work, blood, sweat, tears that built Israel. And it is one of the greatest experiments of the 20th century, for sure.
Right.
What is it?
Well, it's a miracle that we were prepared to do hard work. I mean, that you took a people who are the people of the book, who are people who are students, and transformed this people into soldiers, into farmers, and it's amazing. I mean, the transformation of a culture of the school to a people capable of taking responsibility for its life, a people that absorbed millions of people, never said no to a wandering Jew. That's a powerful moral commitment.
Oh, I agree with you, but I can't get you let you get away with it. And what is a miracle? How do you define that?
Something that inspires you to live with surprise.
Something that inspires you to live with surprise.
Right, and not be...
Is that a religious experience?
I think not to be crushed by routinization. You know, kacha. This is, to feel, life goes its normal course, and never to live with a sense of wonder. The sense of wonderment, the sense of amazement. This Heschel captured this very deeply. How do you get up in the morning and in some way celebrate life as a miracle? That's what I mean. We say that in our prayers. And for the miracles that you do with us each day, what type of miracle is that? Miracle is not just an objective change of nature. It's the way you respond to life. That you live with appreciation, you live with gratitude, you live with surprise, you live with wonderment.
So
You're
it's
not callous.
It's a human
response to reality.
It's a human response.
That's correct.
Not necessarily a religious response. Last time we were here, we interviewed you on Hanukkah, and we talked about the Hanukkah menorah and the miracle of the lights and all that. So basically, with you, a miracle it's interesting.
A miracle is the people who are prepared to sing praises to God from their experiences of life. They're prepared to sing a new song. They're prepared to in some way break the routines of their lives.
Try something new.
Try something new, to be open to something new. That their souls should not shrivel up in the routine. They break routine and they break into a new energy, a new sense of vitality to life. That's the experience of miracle. To live that way is to live with that sense of vivaciousness for life. To get up in the morning and say, Moda ani lefanecha, I give thanks to you for restoring my soul. I celebrate life. I put on my clothes, I make a blessing. I walk straight, I make a blessing. I thank God for the simple biological functioning. I don't take even my existence for granted. Why do we have to suffer in order to appreciate the gifts of life? Part of religion is to, that's the purpose of prayer, is to in some way take the normal things we do and to celebrate it as a surprise. Why do we make a blessing before we eat food? Because we don't take that for granted either. It's a wonderful thing that nature brings forth food and we in some way bring God into this experience. See, God is the experience of surprise. God, the name of God in the Bible is I will be. Not only I was, but I will be. You're open to a new future. You're open to the possibility of something radically new breaking into history. And Israel is the great breaking into something new.
All right, so Jew, basically, they were monotheists, and the God was unavailable, whereas the others, they were paganists.
Yeah, but the point...
They worshipped idols, right?
Jews were the ones who taught about the unseen God, the imageless God.
That's right.
The God who's not experienced through images, through signs, but it's the God who's heard. As the Bible says, you have not seen, but you have only heard. So my understanding of that is that we meet God when we hear the commandment, when we hear our duty, when we develop an ability to be responsible for the other, is when we hear God. God is the transforming of an egocentric soul to a soul that is prepared to live in responsibility for others.
So it's not pots and pans?
No.
It's not land?
No.
You wouldn't give up peace for land. In other words, you want peace more so than land. Am I correct?
To me, a holy land is where holy people live. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes,
in other
absolutely.
words, and I'm concerned about security. I think we have to distinguish between security issue, and I don't know who defines that. That's also an open question. And the question of territorial power. I'm prepared to see the flourishing of a Palestinian reality with their dignity. I'm prepared to share the home with them as long as there won't be shedding of blood.
Okay, so human life is
sacred for me, not land.
Right. Now, Jerusalem, is there anything sacred about Jerusalem?
Oh, very much so. It's sacred because it brings enormous memories to the Jewish people.
Could you share it?
I can share it. I think we can find a way to share it. I think so, in some way. I always say where there's love for God, there's room for the other. In other words, where there's love, there's room. I think we can find some technical solution where we don't lose the deep feeling of our solidarity with Jerusalem, and at the same time find a way to enable the Palestinians to celebrate their own dignity. I think when there will be trust, you will find the opportunities for compromise are enormous. The real issue is trust.
When will that come?
Oh, Leon, I don't know. I think that we both have to act in such a ways that we create trust in each other.
See, Eir Omar, whom we interviewed on this trip, said that Bibi Netanyahu is making a fuss over 9 or 11 or 13%. He said it's not the issue whatsoever. The whole issue is whether you trust the other party, whether you trust Arafat. And this is the standing issue now in terms of whether they go forward on the Oslo agreements.
But you see, the point is this: you can never know if you can trust each other until you've created a new reality.
You have to test it?
You have to test it.
Right.
But you don't test it with your eyes blind as a naive child. You always build in checks to make sure that if it doesn't work, you're not vulnerable. But we have to learn to trust them, not learn to trust them, to give them an opportunity to teach us that we can trust them. And we have to help them learn to trust us. Our track record hasn't been that great either.
Well, I'll give you one of my experiences, which is very poignant. I was very involved in the Camp David peace process. We celebrated at the White House, and after that we had a party where even I sang cantorial songs, and Yigal Yadin was there, Ezer Weitzman, Yitzhak Modai, and they were all calling Israel to find out what the reaction was. There was no happy, really energetic reaction to the fact that Camp David was finally signed. On the other hand, after the Six-Day War, when the battle victory was there, people were euphoric, absolutely euphoric.
Well, that's because they thought that they were going to be destroyed. So that's always that case, you know what I mean? But look at the way we greeted Sadat.
Beautiful, beautiful.
You saw when he landed, the whole country opened their souls to him.
Which shows you what?
That the people really want peace, yearning for peace.
Yearning for peace.
Israelis want peace. They don't want to be machos over the Arabs. This is a good people here. They don't want to be triumphalists. They're not celebrating power and that. They just want to be able to know if they can go to sleep at night in a relaxed way. If they would be convinced that they can trust, Palestinians would have the greatest friends in the Israelis. The Israelis would do more for the Palestinians than any other Arab country. Israelis are prepared to love and to sacrifice if they feel they can trust you.
And right now it's still an open question. David, we're out of time. We've concluded Hartman Tape 3. It's always a pleasure, but more importantly, the message should be out there. People should hear it and know what it's all about.
Thank you, Leon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to express myself.
It's our pleasure, and our audience loves you. We'll see you next week with another show. It can't be a David Hartman, but I think it might be Cardinal O'Connor.